To be in love is to be vulnerable. And to have a child is to be exceptionally vulnerable. We move our faces with the expressions of people that we're watching. Oh, you're type A plus. Well, I'm not going to speak to you. It's like ridiculous.
Hello, welcome to Real and Real Characters. I'm Raji, and it's been a while since I brought out the last episodes of Real and Real Characters. But here I am back again, and this time kickstarting again with Penn Densham, the Hollywood movie writer and producer. Not only because he's a great filmmaker, but also because he's a wonderful human being, and this time he throws light on some very important aspects of human physiology and behavior, which could explain our fascination with the movies and also how and why they so deeply impact our lives. To just brush up your memory a bit, Penn Densham is a British Canadian filmmaker and television producer, writer, director, author, and photographer, known for writing and producing films such as Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and television revivals of The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone, as well as writing, producing, and directing Moll Flanders for MGM. Penn Densham has a website, ridingthealligator.com, with a chapter on discovering the creative force. He has written a very useful book called A Creative Person's Success Manual to help writers and filmmakers and inspire them. A book that he would have wanted to read to help him on his journey, not to tell people how to write, but how to deal with people while they wrote their work. Where does this creative urge come from? For some, like Penn, who achieved great success in his Hollywood career, it could just be a very difficult early life circumstance. But it is these difficulties in his early life which actually triggered him to have great aspirations. And rising above these circumstances is what helped him explore his creative potential and determine the way he would choose to live his life.
My mother's loss was profound, and the horror of a family with a psychotic, drug-taking, alcohol-consuming stepmother who our father wouldn't fight. I was put in an orphanage for a while. My sister and brother were put into foster homes. I had some experiences, but I didn't turn into anger or hate. What they turned into was trying to make the world a better place, because I really think that that's what my mother would have wanted.
And sometimes it is just the simple act of loving wholeheartedly and being sensitive to that love that drives you to do something meaningful to yourself and to others.
To be in love is to be vulnerable. And to have a child is to be exceptionally vulnerable. Our son turns 40 this year, and we are vulnerable. We want him to succeed every day. When our daughter hurts, we hurt. That I think is a privilege. I think it never goes away. And the world I want my kids to grow up in, I wanted the stories that I told to help make it a better place. Struggled like hell, have many failures. We've struggled to make money. My wife and I bicker. You know, it's like we're just normal, but something in me wouldn't settle.
It is that passion to do something worthwhile which actually results in your best work. Listen to Penn on this.
When I talk to people who are creative, I say, please work on the things you're passionate about, because that passion will carry you through sometimes obstacles that an intellectual belief that something is financially valuable won't. Your passion makes you want to keep going and trying to figure it out and make it better and figure out how you can put the things in it that other people need so they can find the same passion and values. And I think in a way I tapped into a natural organic story form, which is a bonding of underdogs to fight for a greater good for the future of their children. And that's the model.
I fear you have returned home to desperate times, when dark forces plot against our absent king. I would give all that I own for his release.
They've taken my Gwen, my daughter.
Who has taken her?
Men on horses, in masks.
Join us, or die.
Father? Master Robin?
Is that you?
Who did this to you, Duncan? I will not rest until my father's avenged. Came an outlaw like you.
You are nothing like us.
In the hands of God!
Fool! You started a war!
We're already at war. And I say we strike back at the very man who takes our home.
Ben, have you found that these movies or the process of making these movies have changed you in any way as an individual, in the way you look at life? Did Robin Hood change you? Did Moll Flanders change you?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't often look at myself that way. I was a panicky, frightened little guy when I fled from England, and made short films with partners because I didn't have the courage to stand up for my own efforts. So I was codependent, but we made a lot of films and learned a lot of things that gave us strengths. But the movie that changed me was Moll Flanders. It was a transformative process writing it because I wrote it in my spare time in secret, and it poured out of my soul. It was like watching dictation come from some other place, and I'm in this wild, absolutely ecstatic state writing, and it is the most compelling and beautiful experience I've had as an artist. And to fulfill that movie and get it made was just phenomenal. I'd made a deal with myself that I wasn't going to be a filmmaker. I wasn't going to say I was a director unless I actually was worthy of it, because I feel like this business is something that has a great dignity to it. And if I wasn't good enough, I was going to shut up and not direct anymore. And so this was the test of my abilities. And at the end of the movie, with a lot of people helping me, a lot of people making it better than I could make it on my own, I went to the chairman of MGM and said, would you mind if I dedicated this movie to my mother? And I put her maiden name on it so that people didn't know. The movie didn't make a lot of money. It didn't come out at a good time because the studio was being sold. But I feel like that was a life moment that enriched me immensely. And it enriched me in ways that don't have values. But I feel like that was a giant accomplishment.
What is this drive, Ben? This deep wanting to tell a story? Why stories?
The story is the way we communicate. When you're asking me what did I do with how does my mother influence my stories, you're asking me to tell you a story about me. We turn the weather into stories. We turn the news into stories. We turn gossip into stories. As a creature, stories are how we communicate. And dreams are, I believe, in a way combined with the purpose of storytelling, they're the way that we reanimate ourselves after a day of information, and different things will impact our personality, the persona we've created. And in dreams, we take those new things, and by the elasticity of the dream stories, they somehow get woven into a new persona, and the next day we're ready for that day, stronger because we've integrated what we've learned. And I think good storytelling does the same thing. You take characters with obstacles, and then they struggle with those obstacles, and we observe that struggle as the audience, and make calculations on our own struggles based on what we see them do.
How does this model, this storytelling, work for humans? And why does it work? See, one goes through so much in order to tell a story in a movie, hoping that at some point of time, somebody in the audience will feel the same way that we felt while putting it together. But what is the real reason that people get so deeply affected by movies, to the extent that it could change their lives, to the extent that they are motivated to hero worship the main actors and actresses? Why does it so deeply affect our psyche? And why do we buy so much into what is being told on screen?
I had the privilege of working with a gentleman called Marshall McLuhan, who was a very big deal in the 60s and 70s as a guru of communications, and he was a professor who taught English studies in the U of T. And one of the things he was talking about was, look at an audience in a movie theater, and you'll notice that these people are in a trance state, and they're moving their faces with the expressions on the characters on the screen. Science has found out that we have these things called mirror neurons, which fire up in our heads in the same places in our brains as when we watch people do physical activities or when we see them have behaviors.
A mirror neuron will fire under one of two conditions: when we have an experience, which we all know happens, or when we witness someone else having an experience. The neuron doesn't know the difference between having and watching the experience. So that's why you can lie on the couch on a Sunday afternoon and watch a soccer game. You're lying down, you're prone, and your heart might be racing, your muscles are tense, you're perspiring, but you're just lying there.
Yeah, when I watch fights, I'm always tense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is the reason, because these neurons don't know the difference.
And so if you see someone do a tumbling at the Olympics, our brain is lighting up as if our body was doing that inside, and we're learning from it. And mirror neurons are part of that, but what I also discovered was we move our faces with the expressions of people that we're watching, and we micro-move them in tiny little muscle movements, and these muscle movements are wired to our pain centers. And this is how we communicate as creatures. This is how we, as a bonded animal that lives in groups, was able to survive, was to be able to read the telepathy of the other people around them in order to try and adapt to what was necessary for the best outcome to survive in that group, to find food for our children. The interesting thing is that if an actor is successful at acting, they say they're acting the truth. And really what's happening is, if the acting isn't truthful, they're not firing off on mirror neurons. And if they're not firing off our mirror neurons, we're not actually able to learn from the behaviors that they're exhibiting. And so acting really becomes mirroring behavior, so that et tu Brutus, we don't have to be Caesar to be stabbed in the back and learn what he did wrong. We can make our own evaluations by watching that process. An actor or an actor is really giving us an opportunity to evaluate ourselves.
Ben, have you been deeply affected by watching any particular movie?
The movie 1917, which is set in the trenches of the 1917 World War I, and it is created to feel like it is a single take, as if the camera never stops. So that movie transported me. Gravity transported me. These directors are taking me to places that I can't experience without their imagination. And I'm incredibly excited about the future of film, because we now have people who are learning how to make films using an iPhone, and they can shoot for free. They can edit for free. They can show it and share it with people for free. And so those people can play with the medium and discover shortcuts or innovations. And I still think that the basic story elements will be the humanistic and organic. You know, there'll be love stories, because we're all about pair bonding and outcomes of love, because that's our basic purpose in life, is to reproduce. And the anthropologists out of Oxford a year ago had done a study of human beings universally around the world, found that loyalty, trust, not stealing, and reverence for life, and those things are universal pre-language. They're a universal pre-culture. They're in us as human beings. And there's a theory in evolutionary psychology. They feel like human beings came down to a very, very small group around 200,000 years ago in Africa. There had been a big die-off, and that the little groups were surviving, but they only could survive by bonding together. And so that it's selected for groups of people that would help each other. They also say that all human beings, which I think is fascinating, are probably coming from one single mitochondrial DNA from a female in Africa 200,000 years ago, which means that we're all bleached Africans somewhere or other. And then, you know, different versions of us went out at different times from Africa. If we teach through storytelling It's to bond people in a better view of sharing their lives with others. It's actually the best route to getting our genes to the future is for me to treat you well so that I get what I want selfishly, which is to get benefits from you so my genes can go into the future. So it's actually a beautiful system. Reading that book actually made me feel better about humanity. And we do have our Adolf Hitlers and our crazy people and our evil, but it's the outliers. It's not the norm. The norm is decency. Because decency, sharing, trading, not taking other people's wives, not stealing their food, not turning their children into slaves. That's a zero-sum game because eventually people will gang up on you and bring you down. Whereas helping, sharing, and exchanging, so that I'm a hunter and you're a cook. Well, I can't hunt and cook, so I need you to do one while I do the other. And that interplay in the tribes, and they used to think that most tribes averaged out at 120, which is the maximum number of people that were stable in a group. And we evolved with this balance, this sense of we belong to each other, we're united, and we will give our lives for others in our group, because the benefit is that the genes that we share go into the future. And the unfortunate thing about that is that we also will fight other groups for territory. And that can be used against us by demonifying other groups. So Hitler demonified the Jews because he could use that fear of other to benefit himself. And the greatest thing we can do is to show that we're all one humanity. That no matter what color of the outside, I've read studies which say there are no races. There is no such thing as a race. We're just different reflections of colors and things, of skin colors. But none of that is actually a genetic type. The only thing that's truly unique in humans is blood types. It would be as ridiculous as saying, "Oh, you're type A plus." Well, I'm not going to speak to you. It's like ridiculous. The great thing about communication is that we burn through the difference. The more we see that we're all the same, with different wonderful values. I say that cultures are like rainforests. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't cut them down because we don't know what we'll lose. So we shouldn't go against the cultures. We should celebrate the cultures. But underneath, we're all root stems. We're all, from the same soil. And that's hopefully as we get more and more free communication with more and more people being able to share their information around the world, the insights to what human beings are will be greater and hopefully better. And there's no perfect answer, just, one hopes.
Altruism seems to be a big driving force in the movies you like and in also the movies that you make. So how does altruism translate itself for you in real life?
I am also supporting, political parties and things here in America because I believe there are people that attempt to do very valuable things, humanistic things. I support some women's rights groups and black groups with money because I'm a bit of a coward and I don't go march. I'm also vulnerable at an age, so I don't really want to expose myself to the virus. But my altruism really is to try and encourage others. And I spend a lot of time and energy giving time to people who I believe are worthy of encouragement. I will teach a little bit. I have written a book. I'm not looking for any income from it. The goal is if I can inspire other people to overcome the self-doubts that I had, then I'm doing something incredibly valuable.
When Penn was 14, his English teacher identified his writing skills and placed great faith in his abilities. It was this faith that became Penn's cushion and anchor whenever he had self-doubt. Also, he was mentored by the renowned filmmaker Norman Jewison, who actually introduced him to Hollywood. Norman Jewison started the Canadian Film Institute and mentored many filmmakers. Inspired by him, Penn has also reached out to many filmmakers to give them strength, help them overcome their self-doubt, and become who they could become. And he has also helped them put together their movies in which he has believed in.
I discovered story by accident from a quiz show. Someone asked, because I'm English, I didn't know about Harriet Tubman, who was the only woman ever to have led troops into battle in the Civil War. And I go, he has this extraordinary, again, altruistic, driven character, and her story needs to be out there so that we see a better perspective of what this woman accomplished. And she's supposed to be on the $20 bill coming, but the present regime pushed that away. Kept going with the project and managed to find some people. The movie got made, and I am part of the background of that film, but I initiated it. And again, I just have an immense sense of accomplishment because the story values in it are things that make one's life feel like you're making choices that are for the better.
Ben Densham also did some amazing experiments in photography where he moved out of all traditional norms and brought out some amazing imagery.
I learned that if you explore every image and ask yourself, what happens if I make it darker? What happens if I add contrast? What happens if I pull the height? And suddenly you start to see things in the images that you thought were throwaways that are beautiful. And they're right when you choke up. And I discovered this word, which I thought was wonderful, called qualia, 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 which is a philosophical term for things that cannot be described in words. And I want my photos to be qualia, which is that you look at them and you feel emotional. And you don't have such descriptive imagery that you just look at it and there's a photograph of the Taj Mahal. I went to the Taj Mahal and photographed and moved the camera. And there are people around and it becomes dreamlike and ethereal and magical. And it engages you emotionally because the movement in the image causes your eye not to be able to lock onto any one image. And your mirror neurons are firing off and you're feeling things. By forcing myself to explore images that were never normal, I found another language. And I say I use the camera as a paintbrush and not a gun, because we're always told to shoot a photo, as if then it must be rigid. And as soon as you say I'm painting, then there's an entirely different perspective. And I do the most idiotic things. I mean, I'm shaking the camera. It's like people are looking at me and I'm going to a tree. It's like, or I'm going like this, or I'm letting people move, but not actually moving myself, but shooting along. Any way that I can make a photograph that is fresh and new is exciting to me. The thing I want to find for others is, what we don't know what's in us, and we mustn't reject the different or the new in us. And that's why I say when people are writing scripts, I say write dangerously. Write to the limits of your ability to be different, because that's probably when you're working to find your voice.
Thank you, Pen, for agreeing to come on the show, and it's been a mind-blowing experience for me.
Well, you're one of my story midwives now, so we're bonded, kid. You're a fellow explorer.
Qualia, the unexpressed, unbelievable beauty and mystery of life, which is out there and all around you, and which you do not want to demystify. It is this that creative minds reach out to somehow touch the grace and elegance that is life. Ben Densham spoke about mirror neurons, the tendency of humans to mirror and absorb what is happening in front of us, and then to react to it in our lives, even though we may not be experiencing it personally. This makes me wonder about a few things. When parents bring up a child, do they realize that the child is watching the world around just like a movie? The child is watching and absorbing the words, the actions, and behavior of all the people around it.
Ready?
Three.
Till the child is 7 years old, they say that it observes and absorbs everything that it sees and hears without discrimination, like a sponge. And who is it observing? Parents, relatives, elders, friends, neighbors, especially parents. And it is based on what they observe and absorb that children build their neural networks and patterns of behavior. And so, when parents have problems with their children, guess where it all began? It also makes it all the more important to associate oneself with people of positive character and behavior. Because remember, you and I are also all the time unconsciously mirroring and imitating the actions and behavior of people around us. And negative behavior is much more easily absorbed than positive ones. I think we really need to be conscious about this. Which brings me to the impact of movies. Do we as an audience realize the impact of movies on our psyche? Do we realize that we might be unconsciously imbibing and absorbing any negative messages that are shown to us in the movie and which might not be in our best interest? How conscious do we need to be of ourselves in order to not let our mental emotional graph go unbalanced? And how responsible do filmmakers and media people have to be in order to not throw out random thoughts into society's gullible minds? Something to really think about, right? So that's it from me for now in this episode. I'll see you again with another great guest and another movie in the next episode of Real and Real Characters. The last episode's movie quiz was: an aristocrat takes a warrant of custody towards a young girl who is being physically mistreated at an orphanage by abusive nuns. Afterwards, he begins to tell her the story about her mother. The questions were: which movie carries this story? What is the name of this aristocrat and who plays the role? And does the young girl meet her mother? The answers to this movie quiz are: which movie carries this story? The answer: Moll Flanders. What is the name of the aristocrat who plays the role? Answer: the aristocrat is called Hybel, and this role is played by Morgan Freeman. Does the young girl meet her mother? Answer: yes, and she reconciles with her. Penn Densham wrote and directed a mini-series on a real-life magician. The questions are: who is the magician? Who plays the role of the magician? And what is the most famous escape known about the magician?